Good evening to you, Dr. Yusuf. Thanks a lot for joining us this evening. Thank you.
Good evening, Jumoke. My pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. You know, the task of putting Nigeria on the path to economic prosperity is enormous, but not insurmountable. Economists like you have said, it requires transformational and drastic changes. The current administration, understanding this, introduced major policy shifts, what some may call shock therapy. So, for you, how are we doing as a country?
Well, I think we are making some progress to the extent that we have initiated some very fundamental reforms, because we are dealing with an economic condition that has suffered several years of dysfunctionalities. And it will take some time to be able to redress some of these dysfunctionalities. For instance, if you take our oil and gas sector, for instance, for over a decade or even more, the refineries we have there had not functioned. And that has continuously put a lot of pressure on the fiscal operations of government. It has created very serious macroeconomic challenges over the years. Because if you look at the pressure on our foreign exchange, for instance, on our reserves, the biggest pressure is coming from the importation of petroleum products, which is an irony, because we are an oil-producing country. Mm. Then the oil and gas sector upstream has also suffered major setbacks. Again, this is a cumulative thing. Over the years, the situation with our oil and gas sector governance had deteriorated significantly. We had very serious issues with the policy environment. It took us almost 15 years to be able to come up with a Petroleum Industry Act, despite the series of complaints by investors in that sector. And that policy shortcoming was compounded by the problem of insecurity. The whole space became almost an ungoverned space, where there were all manner of atrocities, criminalities, theft, all manner of things were going on there. And here is a sector which is supposed to be a pillar of this economy, from the point of view of revenue and from the point of view of foreign exchange earnings. Then we had a foreign exchange environment that also suffers some very serious dysfunctionalities from a policy perspective. So many of these things had accumulated. We also had the problem of insecurity. Mm. So these are pressures that the administration inherited. And these are things that the reforms that the administration is dealing with is seeking to correct. But the challenge is that if you have a problem that had accumulated over almost 2 decades, you cannot correct it in 1 year. If you try to do so, it will put a lot of pressure on the citizens, which is what we are witnessing now. So the reforms are good, but we need to put it in context, and we need to recognize that the citizens can only bear so much in the process of the reform. So what we need to worry about at this point is how to reduce the social cost of the reform. Many economists were in favor of the reforms, but not many of us imagine that the cost of that reform from a social perspective will be as high as it has turned out to be. And that is what economics is.
So, Dr.
Economics
Yusuf,
is social science.
Are you in other words saying that the federal government was too hasty with some of its policies and so had caused or put so much pressure on government?
No, well, something like that. The point I'm making is that, you know, because of the peculiarities of our environment, because we are in an economy and we have a country where the social safety nets are extremely very, very weak, we need to make haste slowly. The reforms are good, but the citizens can absorb only so much because of the very weak social safety nets that we have. I mean, take the energy sector, for instance, and take the issue of the fuel subsidy. We know that the economy was bleeding profusely from the subsidy regime, and there was a need to correct it. A first major step was taken at the inception of the administration, which was fine. The citizens were still struggling to cope with that. Then subsequently, we had further reviews and further reviews. And when you look at the entire environment, you notice that unlike what you have in other climes, our public investment in public transportation is extremely very low. We have a transportation system that is almost 98% driven by the private sector. The private sector cannot offer you social pricing. They will offer you commercial pricing. And you know how central transportation is to the economy and to the ordinary people. So that was a major shock, both to businesses and to the citizens. So for that kind of sector, with the benefits of hindsight, I think we needed to have gone slowly. That is why I get worried about the latest review. Because already the citizens were almost overstretched. Then suddenly we had this 40% increase. So this kind of transition has to happen slowly because of the large number of vulnerable people that we have. So we don't want an economy or a reform process that will leave too many people behind. That is the point I'm making. The reforms are good.
Yusuf. In one of the statements
of the reform is something that I think we need to decelerate a bit.
All right, Dr. Yusuf. In one of the statements released by CPPE, I mean, you commended the federal government's application of fiscal policy measures to boost productivity of the Nigerian pharmaceutical manufacturing industries. And to be specific, you said fiscal policy measures have proven to be more impactful on real sector performance than monetary policy. But I'd like you to expatiate on the need for the federal government to arrest the deindustrialization of Nigerian economy by ensuring that local industries are protected from liberal trade policies.
Yes. For me, I think that is the way to go. Because if you look at the policy responses to the economic situation so far, we have had a very large dose, even almost an overdose, of monetary policy intervention in the policy or in the economic environment. We saw how the tightening of monetary policy has squeezed the economy from a financial perspective. We saw what had happened to interest rates. And we know the implication of high interest rates for investment. We know the implication of high interest rates for job creation, for inclusion. Because we are gradually moving now to a point where major investors are being disconnected from the financial system or from the banking system. Because otherwise, how can an investor, say in the agricultural sector, go and borrow money from the bank at 30% or at 25%? It cannot work. How can a manufacturer go to the bank to borrow money at 25 or 30% for manufacturing investments? It cannot work. How can somebody in real estate go and borrow money at 30%? It cannot work. So you can see the number of critical sectors that are being excluded from our financial sector in terms of funding. And the primary purpose of a bank is financial intermediation. Not all this selling of forex or opening LCs and all of that. It's financial intermediation. And what financial intermediation means is the mobilization of resources, financial resources, from the surplus end of the economy to the deficit end of the economy. Now you have a deficit end of the economy that requires a lot of funding. Financing gap in the SME space alone runs into trillions of naira. But how many people can take money at this kind of rate? And it's not only that the rates are high, the tenors are also very short. The best you can get in the financial or in the banking system is maybe a tenor of 2-3 years maximum. So these are shortcomings that we need to reckon with.
Dr.
These
Yusuf,
are also evidence of market failure that requires government intervention. That is why we say in an economy, even in a market economy, in the best of market economies, we recognize the presence of market failure. And once you recognize market failure in any sector, in any segments of the economy, government intervention is imperative. So as we progress with the reform, we should identify things that the market cannot fix.
But Dr. Yusuf, this submission on high interest rates, does it contradict this recent statement by the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Wale Edun, where he said that the financial sector grew by over 30% in the first half of 2024?
Well, I don't think there is any major relationship as such between what I'm saying and what the minister said. The reality is that when you look at the GDP numbers, of course, the financial sector was one of the best performing. But what happened to the real sector? The sectors that actually are job elastic. And when I say job elastic, I mean sectors that, as they grow, they generate more jobs. Because the impact of growth in the financial services sector is not felt by the larger economy. How many people are employed in the financial sector? What is the multiplier effect? And I've told you a major function of the banking system and the financial system is financial intermediation. So with an interest rate of 30%, there's a collapse of intermediation. So they are just like a financial supermarket where they just look at some good sectors, put money there, get their returns. And in any case, they have an advantage. Because whether you are a business person, whether you are an SME, whether you are government, all your monies go through the banking system. Because they are at a critical junction. And as your money is going through them, they are taking commission. So why would they not be making money? But it's something to worry about. If you have an agricultural sector that is almost stagnating, you have a manufacturing sector that is slowing, you have some sectors that are in contraction, and yet you have a financial system that is posting a GDP growth of over 30%. It doesn't add up. It's also a reflection of some dysfunctionalities.
All right, but because we've talked about government intervention.
The performance of the financial sector is supposed to reflect the performance of the wider economy. But there's a
right,
disconnect.
Dr. Yusuf, you've just talked about government intervention. How exactly do you think governments must intervene in this particular situation?
No, you alluded to the issue of fiscal policy. I mean, the government has come up with a stabilization plan, which is an excellent plan, if you ask me. And the plan has a large content in terms of fiscal policy, which relates to your earlier question. Because we have overstretched the monetary policy instruments. We are transiting now to the use of more fiscal policy, which has the prospect of lowering costs of production, lowering costs of operation, also bringing down the level of inflation. If we're able to reduce import duty, because in order to fix the challenges that we are dealing with today, the government must be ready to also trade off some revenue, especially in the fiscal policy space. The taxes doesn't have to be so high. Import duty doesn't have to be this high. Cost of clearing containers at the port should not be this high. If you reduce all those parameters, it may lead to some loss of revenue, but it will have a very significant impact on investment, on economic growth, on job creation, and more importantly, on inflation. The president is worried about high cost of living. The citizens are equally worried. But what we need to do is to deploy this fiscal policy measure, which the government is already doing, to bring down cost of doing business. But there's a challenge of the speed of implementation.
All right.
So we need to work a lot on the bureaucracy. Because it is for the political actors to come up with the policies. It is for the bureaucracy to implement. And when we are dealing with an emergency situation as we have, that urgency has to reflect in the implementation of the policies. So if you have a policy and it's thrown down to the bureaucrats to implement, and they begin to move so slowly, it's something that should worry everybody. You alluded to the statement that you made about the pharmaceutical industries. The president released an executive order in June to scrap import duty on pharmaceutical products, on medical equipment, and all of that, which was a very commendable policy, especially in the light of the high cost of medication, of drugs. People who have medical conditions, they will tell you how difficult it is at this time. So if the government has issued a presidential order that the duty should go, that was in June. Up till now, the implementation had not been effected. So we need to call out the bureaucracy.
All right. To
ensure that whatever it is put on the table to deal with these issues that we are grappling with in the economy, they implement it expeditiously. It's extremely, very, very important.
All right, Dr. Yusuf.
So that we are all on the same page with what the president wants to achieve. They need to support the president to be able to deliver concrete outcomes from these policies.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about economic diversification. Please stay with us, everyone. Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Tonight, our focus is on the Nigerian economy as President Bola Tinubu says his administration is restoring confidence in Nigeria's economy through measures to reduce inflation, stabilize the foreign exchange market, and improving fiscal management. And I've been speaking with Dr. Musa Yusuf, is the CEO Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Dr. Yusuf, thanks a lot for staying with us on the program. I want us to talk about economic diversification because it's been over a decade since this conversation about economic diversification took a new dimension. There are those who say Nigeria's challenge of economic diversification is situated within the political setting of an unstable distribution of power among individual institutional actors. Would you say that policymaking by successive Nigerian governments has, despite partisan differences, been oriented towards short-term crisis management of this macroeconomic stabilization? Dr. Yusuf, did you get my question?
Yes, I got it. The issue of economic diversification is a function of the environment that we create. An economy gets the kind of investment that it deserves. If you create an economic environment where buying and selling is what is rewarding, that is where people and investors will go. If you create an environment where production is very rewarding, investment will go into production. If you create an environment where it's only the service sector that are doing well, you just reported about performance in the financial sector. That is where investors will go. So it's a function of the kind of environment that we create. To diversify this economy, we must create an environment that will allow other sectors of the economy to come up. So that when investors go there, they don't go there and begin to lament that they have gone to invest in that sector. Many investors in manufacturing now, many of them are lamenting because of some of the shocks that they have experienced over years, not just under this administration. Whereas people who are investing in financial instruments, buying government bonds, buy treasury bills, maybe they put their money in forex, those ones are smiling. But how many jobs are those ones creating for the economy? The ones that are creating the jobs are the ones that are feeling the heat the most. That is why the focus of policy should be on how to support those who are producing. And those who are in other sectors, that is what can help to spread out, the growth of the sectors and diversify the economy. And reduce our dependence on oil and gas and even some of the services sector.
So Dr. Yusuf, that's where I'm going.
So
because
it is a question of, yes.
That's where I'm going, because economists say the need to diversify the economy, reduce the cost of governance, and improve revenue generation are panaceas towards economic development. So for you, how much concentration is the federal government paying to these different segments of reviving the economy?
Well, let me say again that this is not only a federal government issue. Because there's a general tendency to federalize all the problems of this country and say everything is about the federal government. The state governments have a role to play. The local governments have a role to play. And the issue here is about creating the right kind of infrastructure. How can you grow the industrial sector if the cost of energy is as high as what we're experiencing now? Check out all the countries that have industrialized. Fixing the energy sector is number one. And some of them even subsidize that sector. Because they know that with that energy, hardly can anything happen, especially in the area of production. But look at the energy cost. To what extent that any business can survive with the current cost of energy? Gas, the manufacturer will tell you is being priced in dollars. You know what the cost of diesel is? You know what even electricity tariff. See how it has gone up. It took the intervention of the president to even reduce the tariff for educational institutions, the universities and public health institutions. So we cannot run away from subsidizing our energy sector. I don't know how we are going to do it to avoid abuse, but because of the developmental role of energy in an economy, particularly a developing economy, we cannot throw it completely to the market. There has to be some kind of subsidy that is not vulnerable to abuse. The framework, we can work it out one way or the other. And I talked earlier about financing. If you want to grow the real sector of the economy, there has to be concessionary financing. Mm-hmm. The real sector, real estate, manufacturing, agriculture, construction, ICT, all of them need concessionary financing. You can get concessionary financing from the commercial banks. So we need to double down, we need to accelerate the pace of expanding the scope of development finance institutions so that you can have single-digit interest rates and you can have long-term funds. These are the things that you need to diversify the economy. Then, of course, you have issues of insecurity, which is also a very big issue. Mm. We know what that has, the kind of setback that has caused us in our agricultural sector. So when we are talking about economy, of course, we have macroeconomic issues. The stability of the forex environment, the issues of high inflation, interest rate, and all of that. Those are macroeconomic issues. We are making some progress with the stability of forex. We are seeing some consistent intervention by the central bank. That is commendable. But we need to do a lot more.
Dr. Yusuf, I want you to also
see how we stabilize
the cost of governance.
No, cutting the cost of governance is also very important. I mean, look at some of the reports I was reading, very recently. When you have a ministry, maybe airspace or something, and you have some very strange content in their budget. Budget headings that are completely unrelated to the function of that ministry or that parastatal. I mean, how do we defend that? That kind of thing should not be allowed to happen. If you want to set aside a budget, separate budget for constituency projects, let us do it separately. We should not, in the name of constituency project, be throwing projects into all sorts of ministries. It's not good. It's not good for our reputation. And it can be very embarrassing. I've read a couple of that in the last 1 week. Constituency project, by the nature of our own democracy, is not an entirely bad idea. Because for the citizens, what they see as the benefit to them for the democracy are the projects that you bring to the community. In my village, we had a representative in the National Assembly. As far as they are concerned, the only benefit he had brought to the community was the borehole. He brought about 5 or 6 boreholes to the community.
All right.
That is the value they see in the representation. It's not the debate that the man is contributing in the National Assembly. It's not the number of bills that is passing. It's what is physical that they can see. It could be borehole, it could be health centers, it could be roads. That is our own democracy.
Dr. Yusuf,
for goodness sake, let us separate the budget for constituency projects from the budget of the mainstream MDAs. This idea of throwing all manner of assorted projects into MDAs, but it's not good at all. We have to review it.
Also, is Nigeria's public debt a point of concern for you? I mean, recently there was a statement released by Musa Faki, who is the chairman of the African Union Commission. He said that debt relief is an urgent imperative for many African states to give them vital economic breathing space. So, do you think Nigeria needs to seek some form of debt relief to free up more resources for national development?
Well, I think so, because the burden of debt I mean, our debt now is, I think, close to 121 trillion or so. That burden is huge. And when you look at the cost implication of servicing those debts, it deprives the economy of investment in some very critical infrastructure. And sometimes it could be very suffocating. So it is not out of place for us to seek relief where we can get the reliefs. It's not out of place. But the good thing so far is that we have been seeing a recalibration of the distribution of the portfolio of debts. Because if you look at our external debt, the bulk of it are multilateral debts, which is about, I think, 40% or 45%. Our multilateral debts are generally more concessionary. The interest rates are often not too high, and their tenures are very long. But we must commit those debts to tangible projects that can help to strengthen the capacity of the economy to be more productive. Then we have bilateral debts. Bilateral debts are debts from, all these Chinese loan and all of that. A lot of them are also committed directly to projects. They are not debts that you collect and you throw into the federation account and we begin to spend. No. That is one beauty of some of these bilateral debts. And bilateral debts, as we speak, is about 14% of total external debt. The one that's a bit disturbing is the commercial debt. That is the Euro bond. That one, you hardly can negotiate that. And the interest rates are a bit high. But the government has been rebalancing the portfolio, which is good. Because it seems to have more domestic debt now than foreign debt. Domestic debts are easier to manage. But again, you talked about issue of cost of governance and all of that. If the bulk of that is also going to servicing the apparatus of government, it's of concern. So we need to take a critical look at the expenditure profile to ensure that even when we are taking this facility, either externally or locally, we are committing it cost effectively. And we are targeting things that can help grow the economy, particularly infrastructure. See, I'm still concerned that the proportion of our budget that is going into infrastructure is still very low. Because it is not everything we call capital project that is infrastructure. Okay. Sometimes all these computers, vehicles, and all of that, sometimes they are classified as capital projects. It can be misleading. There is nothing wrong if we are spending 50% of our budget on infrastructure, because that is what will help productivity. That will help to create jobs. You talk about economic diversification. That is what will help to diversify the economy. So we need to take a critical look at this allocation and also, reduce the amount of resources we spend on the apparatus of governance. That is very, 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 very important.
Dr. Yusuf, let's go back to the challenges bedeviling in the petroleum sector, especially this recurring decimal, fuel scarcity. What do you think is wrong with that sector?
Well, as I said earlier, one of the sectors that has suffered the worst form of governance over the years is the oil and gas sector, unfortunately. And that's a sector that could have easily pulled us out of all of this mess. That's a sector that will have leveraged upon to leapfrog into a higher level as a developing economy. But unfortunately, the sector was mismanaged. From a policy point of view, from a political point of view, from criminality point of view. So the current administration is in the process of resetting the sector. We need to make the processes more transparent. We now have a Petroleum Industry Act. It may not be perfect, but it's far better than what we used to have. We now have a lot of commitment of the administration to incentivizing investment in gas. We have more gas than crude oil. And there's a huge market for gas. The government has rolled out quite a number of incentives to get more, investors in the gas sector. The government has also thrown a whole lot of resources into combating the problem of criminality in the oil and gas sector, especially in the oil-producing areas. We are not there yet, but some progress is being made. So we have issues around policy. We have issues around governance generally. But I must say, this has been a cumulative problem. We have, over several years, people who are getting oil blocks who have no idea about what petroleum industry was all about. And these are huge assets of the country that belongs to the
Yusuf,
people.
You just called for transparency.
That is what has brought us to this point.
Are you on the side of, you just called for transparency, so I'm asking, are you on the side of those calling for a total overhaul of the oil and gas sector?
Of course, we need an overhaul. You cannot be doing the same thing and expect a different result. We need an overhaul, but there is a challenge. The challenge is the political economic component in energy pricing, particularly petroleum products. Because, I must be frank with you, we cannot completely deregulate the PMS for now, completely deregulate it. It's extremely difficult in the current social environment. Given the current state of poverty, and given the impact of petrol pricing on the citizens, we cannot walk away from it completely. So in an attempt to do that, a lot of abuses come into it, but we can work out a framework for it.
So what kind of
we can
framework
make the whole process more.
Dr. Yusuf, what kind of framework would you advise the government to put together? Because, overhaul, the sentence overhaul is now sounding very generic and quite cliche.
Now, when we talk about overhaul, the issue of management of the place. That is one issue. We need to ensure that we put in place a management that will be more transparent or can increase the level of transparency. Secondly, we need to disconnect the political players as much as possible from the sector, so that the sector can run professionally. We need to reduce the influence of bureaucrats on the sector, so that the sector can run professionally. Then the political economic component of it. If you had to set aside a budget for subsidy yearly that will cap at a particular level, that, okay, this year, this is our subsidy budget, we are not going to go beyond it. We can designate some stations. It could be NNPC stations. And say for this year, we are budgeting 2 trillion. So that for those stations, they will not sell fuel maybe more than 500 naira. Of course, there will be a long queue there. But those who will go and queue are not the elites. They are not the people who are using the kind of SUVs that you see, the modern SUVs. They will not go and queue. This one can go and buy at the market price. But let's create a window for the vulnerable segments. To say that if you are coming to this station, first, you are not buying jerry cans. Second, we are not selling more than 30 liters for you, but we are selling at maybe 500 naira. That is government intervention for the vulnerable segments. And for people who are struggling, they don't mind to queue for 5 hours to be able to buy that kind of thing. We can have that all over the country. The state government can also designate some stations where they can sell subsidized fuel. It is the poor people that will go and kill. The big guys will not kill. All these managers and top guys in the banks or in the telcos, they will not go and kill. They don't have the time. So that way, we find a way to distribute. I mean, we could be more creative. But we have to restore quality governance into the oil and gas sector. We already have MOFI, Ministry of Finance Incorporated. They are doing some work aggregating government assets. But we need to insulate all of these things from political interference, from interference from the bureaucracy. That is the only way it can work. So that is the framework, that's the kind of framework I think we can put in place. I mean, look at what is happening with NLNG. After all, it's working well. They are giving dividends, they are very professional. You haven't had any serious scandal around them because they are professionally run. The same thing can happen with NNPC. If you create the right kind of governance framework.
Right. Because of time, let's quickly talk about price stability. Because, you know, CBN has deployed several monetary policy tools and instruments to achieve price stability. But despite the deployment of these tools, the inflationary pressure has persisted. Are you on the same page with those who say to succeed, the CBN must independently pursue inflation goals? I mean, for most Nigerians, they do not understand what this means. What does this mean in a layman language?
Well, it's inflation targeting, or inflation goal, as you put it. And the whole idea is to make sure that monetary policy instruments are focused to achieve reduction in inflation. That is what it means in layman's language. But we have been pursuing that policy for several years, even under the previous dispensation of the central bank. How much have we succeeded in bringing down inflation? The key drivers of inflation are issues of cost. Increasing or reducing or increasing interest rate is not going to bring down the cost of diesel, the cost of gas, the cost of transportation. It's not going to bring down the cost of your clearing of cargo at the port. It's not going to bring down your import duty that you are paying. All of these things are fueling costs and they are fueling inflation. So there's a limit to which we can depend on these CBN instruments. As I said earlier, we have overstretched these monetary policy tools. And that is why I'm glad about what the government is doing by transiting to the use of fiscal policies. But we need to expedite that. Fiscal policies to reduce taxes in some critical sectors, to waive VAT, to reduce import duty, so that the costs at which entrepreneurs are getting their inputs will be reduced. And invariably, this will transmit into lower costs of goods and services. That's, for me, I think, is the way to go.
Thank you so much for another eye-opening conversation. It's always a pleasure speaking with you on the state of the economy. Thank you so much. Dr. Musa Yusuf is the CEO.
Thank you very much, Jumoke. It's my pleasure.
Private enterprise. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, sir.